Alrighty, peace sake. First thing that we're going to look at today is the relationship between hunger and motivation. And what we're going to do is look at the physiological factors, the psychological factors, and the sociocultural factors that all influence our experience with hunger and how it relates to motivation. One of the first things the book does is looks at an experiment that was conducted by Washburn and Cannon. And what they wanted to understand is what precisely triggers hunger. And they were curious if it was the pains of an empty stomach. So Washburn swallows a balloon, which you can see in the illustration, which actually measured stomach contractions, because every time your stomach growls, what's actually happening is the lining in your stomach is contracting. He was then encouraged to press the lever that you see on the illustration every time he felt hungry, and he wanted to see if his hunger pains were correlated with the stomach contractions. And they actually did find, in fact, there was a relationship. But the question was, would hunger persist without stomach pains? And the answer to that question is yes, because they did experiments with rats where the stomachs were removed, and they found that rats still continued to eat. In some unfortunate situations with humans whose maybe ulcerated stomachs or cancerous stomachs were removed, they too found that hunger persisted. So we know, physiologically speaking, that hunger has a variety of causes and triggers. Some include stomach contractions, but some include other physiological responses. And that's what we're going to take a look at next. Insulin, we know, is a hormone secreted by the pancreas. And if your level of blood sugar drops, your hunger tends to increase. You have an appetite. You don't really consciously notice this change in your blood chemistry, however it happens. We have signals from our stomach, our intestines, liver, and those signals are all sent to our brain, and they either tell us that yes, in fact, you're hungry and you should eat, or you're not. You need to stop eating or you're full. Our hypothalamus, we know, is a structure within our brain, and that actually triggers a hormone called orexin. It's a hunger triggering hormone that's released when the blood sugar levels drop. Ghrelin is another hunger arousing hormone, but this is actually secreted in your stomach. And when your stomach is empty, ghrelin is released. So they have found in severely obese patients that undergo bypass surgery that seals off part of the stomach that much less ghrelin is actually secreted or produced, and that is why their appetite lessens. And they have more success losing weight. Experimental psychologists are working on creating an appetite-reducing medication that counteracts our hunger-producing chemicals. Leptin is a chemical that's secreted by fat cells. PYY is a digestive hormone that suppresses appetite. And there really was a lot of research involved in looking at PYY and finding a magic pill that would replicate PYY. Unfortunately, they found in rats that PYY did not replicate. It was a big fat disappointment. Ha ha. So maybe that's a good thing, that there isn't this magic pill that can be taken for weight loss. Here you see a picture of the hypothalamus. The red structure highlighted there is the hypothalamus located within our brain and limbic system. And as we saw in Chapter 2, the hypothalamus performs various maintenance functions, one including control of hunger. We have blood vessels that supply the hypothalamus, and that enables us, our hypothalamus, to respond to our current blood chemistry and influence our feelings of being hungry or full. This is a picture of a really fat rat in a study done with the hypothalamus. They found that if part of the hypothalamus was destroyed, these rats never in fact received the signal that they were full, kept eating, and then became very obese. Likewise, they found destruction in another region of the hypothalamus. They never were given the trigger that they were hungry, and they found that rats stopped eating and were malnourished. So we know that the hypothalamus is directly related to our response of hunger. Another thing that the book talks about is what's called the set point in the basal metabolic rate. An older hunger theory proposed that by manipulating our set point, that we could then in turn lose weight or gain weight. But what we find is really overall our body has this kind of weight thermostat in which our weight typically settles at. And it might increase hunger when you have a lowered metabolic rate, and it may act to restore the lost weight. Likewise, the opposite can hold true. The basal metabolic rate is our body's resting rate of energy and expenditure, and it really takes a look at caloric intake and energy expenditure and how that affects your overall feelings of energy and whatnot. Another aspect related to motivation and hunger is the psychology aspect. Some of us are internal and we really listen to our internal cues to find food or to be satisfied and stop eating. And some people find that there are external factors, like memory and time elapsed since the last meal. Some of you may not even have an internal trigger that tells you you're hungry. You simply look at the clock or you think about how long it's been since you last ate. And even if you're not hungry, you'll go sit down and eat. Some people, it's very much triggered by sights and smells. Once again, you might not be hungry, but you see something that looks good or you smell something and you eat it. We have a lot of different variety of foods. We're really blessed in a culture where we see variety and have opportunities. You know, some people have taste preferences where, you know, we are more risk takers and try new things and are excited for those opportunities, where some people have a pretty bland taste palette. They prefer, when they go to a restaurant, to order the same things. They don't really like trying new things. For some of us too, it's our mood. When we're feeling stressed or sad, sometimes we eat as a way of dealing with it, or sometimes we eat out of boredom. We know that carbohydrates help boost our levels of serotonin, which is found to have calming effects. And we also know that culture affects taste too. When you have traveled, you've probably noticed differences in the types of foods that are eaten, and what might be a delicacy in one might be taboo and disgusting and forbidden in another culture. You might notice portion size differences or how many courses they will sit down and eat. Even just, you know, the relationship piece, the social atmosphere surrounding food and events. One of the interesting things that sometimes we see on shows like the link that I have listed here, that Andrew Zimmern, Bizarre Foods, he's actually a Minnesota native. You can check out some of the different cultural delicacies that he has tried in different regions of the world. On the left here, you see an Inuit eating whale fat and blubber. And on the right, it's hard to see, but they're fried ants. And if you would like to try either of those. So we know that, you know, our hunger and whether we're motivated to eat can be influenced biologically by the hypothalamus, appetite hormones, stomach pains, our set and settling point, our universal attraction to certain kinds of foods, or our wariness to trying novel and unique foods. Psychologically speaking, it's the sight and smell, it's the memory or time of the that has elapsed since our last meal, and even mood. Socioculturally, we look at culturally identified taste preferences. And in the next slide, we're going to be looking at how cultures idealize being thin, which does lead to the other aspect of motivation and hunger, psychologically speaking, is eating disorders. Eating disorders are something that for some of you hit very close to home. You might know someone that suffers from an eating disorder, or maybe even personally have struggled with it. So in the past half century, there's been a dramatic increase in poor body image, and it's coincided with a rise in eating disorders among women, especially in Western cultures. I don't think any of you who is listening to this isn't familiar with anorexia nervosa and bulimia nervosa, but it is important to understand the difference between the two. There are other psychological factors like challenging family settings, sometimes social pressures, low self-esteem, negative emotions, and that seems to interact with maybe stressful life experiences, and as a result, people may find themselves with an eating disorder. Twin research studies have also indicated that eating disorders might have a genetic component. So anorexia nervosa is defined as when a normal weight person, usually an adolescent female, diets and becomes significantly, which would be about 15% or more, underweight, yet still feeling fat, continues to starve themselves. Bulimia nervosa is when episodes of binging or overeating, usually high-calorie foods, are followed by either vomiting, laxative use, fasting, or excessive exercise. So we know that this is a very serious mental illness. In fact, the DSM-5 indicates the severity of eating disorders and how it's considered one of the deadliest mental disorders out there. In our book, it does show you a picture of some cases of severe anorexia nervosa. So tomorrow, during the hour, we're going to be watching a video called Dying to be Thin. For those hybrid kids that are at 85% or better, they won't have to be in class or do the video analysis, but those who are will be watching the video and filling out about a 10-point video analysis.